This podcast features a story that includes domestic violence. If you need help or support in the UK, please contact Refuge on 0808 2000 24/7, or in the US, it's the Domestic Violence Hotline on 1-800-799-SAFE. That's 7233.
Thanks, dude. Cheers for that, mate. Very important. But welcome back anyway to the Never Mind Anything Comics Review podcast. This week we're tackling, believe it or not, after that introduction, 2 Superman titles. Back once again, you just heard him, is the Scottish Renegade Master, Mr. Alan Henderson. How you doing, dude? You all right?
Greetings.
Stuff. We've actually recorded. It's Monday as we record today. We did 2 hours on Friday with the Canon, didn't we? Yeah.
What day is it? Yes.
Yeah, good stuff. Now you have chosen to talk about these 2 issues. I had not read them before. I did check back through my records. I didn't even own them, which is, I don't have a full run of those series, but I have most of them, so it's a bit unusual I didn't have them.
So we should probably say that our intention was to read something else, and we've had difficulty getting you a copy of.
Oh God, I've ordered it twice. That reminds me, I must try and claim it back from Royal Mail because I never received either of them.
And then you said, well, what can you think of a story that we should do instead that's easily accessible to us? So I've gone for something that's on the DC app.
Yeah,
and this is a story that for odd reasons is imprinted in my brain as being something that I was going to say vividly remember, but I don't. It's more that I vividly remember the concept of what it was trying to say. Okay. I think it's always been there, and given that it dates back to 1991.
Okay,
I should double check the date. It's quite impressive that it's stuck in my head that long.
Yeah. You were probably 6 or 7 back then, weren't you? Yeah.
Depending on what number base you're talking about, yes.
Yeah, it's a comic. Why don't you say the title, the numbering, etc., and then we can talk a bit about it after that.
So here's the thing. So it's actually from the Triangle era of Superman, and we'll maybe go back into more of that in some depth. So it's actually 2 issues, one from Superman the Man of Steel, and it's number 16, and Superman number 72. So this is the storyline that is essentially the last full storyline before the arrival of Doomsday and the death of Superman.
Yeah, because literally the next issue we get the punching the wall Doomsday moment, don't we?
Yeah. So it's it's building it into that as a here we go. It's a weird one from that sense as well, because it's a story all about not having power.
Yeah.
While having power.
Yeah.
And it's a weird mix from that.
Yeah. So how about if I'll list the credits, if you wouldn't mind, then just giving just a little bit of an overview. So Man of Steel 16, Crisis at Hand, covered by John Bognove. I don't know, so I never know how to say that. Dennis Janke. Story by Louise Simonson and John Bogdanovi, who also created Steel. I forgot about that. The 2 of them created Steel. Finishes by Dennis Janke. Letters by Bill Oakley. Colours Glenn Whitmore. Assistant editor Jennifer Frank, and edited by the famous Mike Carlin. The second issue is Superman 72, Powerless, as you just said. It's got 2 titles: Rage, Crisis at Hand. Covered by Dan Jurgens and Brett Breeding. Story and layout by Dan Jurgens. Finished art by Brad Van Cater. Letters John Costanza. Colours Glenn Whitmore, and the same editorial team on it. Obviously Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. Did you just want to give it because it's I hesitate to say filler because it's more powerful than that, isn't it? But it's kind of a 2-parter that is sort of wedged in just before probably the biggest event DC Comics from in some ways ever saw, really.
So it's quite a domestic storyline as well, in that it's about Clark and Lois having a life together. This is the point where I think they're engaged, but not yet married.
And they're not
I'm trying to
living
remember.
together, are they?
No, yeah.
God forbid.
But she knows, she knows he is Superman
Yeah.
and all this sort of stuff. So anyway, as a Clark, it starts essentially as being a Clark Kent storyline where Clark Kent lives in an apartment building in Metropolis, and while he's at home, he can hear through the wall what's happening with his neighbors.
Yeah.
And that's because the husband of the next door neighbor is he's lost his job. He's struggling to find work, and whatever, basically they're setting up a set of excuses in inverted commas as to why it turns out that he then gets angry every time he comes home and is upset about the fact that the dinner's not on the table and all this sort of stuff, and basically is battering his wife.
Yeah.
And Clark Kent hears it all through the wall because or hears it because he's Superman through the wall.
Yeah.
And the purpose of the first issue is essentially him saying, right, as Superman, I'm going to deal with this. So he flies out his window and then flies in their window and basically says, right, I'm here to save you, here to stop everything. And as is often the case in such situations, the wife actually ends up defending the husband from Superman rather than actually seeking defense herself. And it's, Clark really struggles to know what to do with this because, he has all of the power. He can hear everything through the wall. He's able to fly in and out the window to do everything, but he then has none of the power because she doesn't want to be saved at that point.
Yeah.
And then it becomes this really interesting story about Clark and Lois saying, well, how do we deal with this?
Yeah.
Classic moment as well of Clark going back to Smallville, engaging with Pa Kent.
One of my favourite moments of this, that was, yeah.
And basically telling him about what's going on and what had happened previously with the previous similar circumstances. And then basically Lois starts taking on the hero role and using her journalist powers, if you like, or skills, I should say, to say, well, okay, I'm going to speak to the wife and I'm going to find out information by using a very early phone hacking.
Yeah, that's extraordinary, isn't it? Yeah, she uses her hi-fi system or Clark's hi-fi system to hack into and listen to her making a phone call, the wife making a phone call.
Yes,
yeah,
next door.
Very strange. Yeah.
And it's and through that she's able to, and by her having a woman to woman talk, if you will, or whatever, they go through the process of saying, right, she looks to seek help, and ultimately the husband looks to seek help as well. Though in later stories you see that he perhaps continues to have some anger management issues.
Yeah, we'll mention that.
But that's essentially the story. In terms of the two issues. Spoiler warnings for everybody should have come on that. Right?
There's also this background, isn't there? So Superman has, early on in his career, he made a mistake in relation to a similar set of circumstances that caused.
So this is what this is the sort of the second part of the story, is where he's there's some really, for as dark as the story is, there's some really weird throwaway things. That Clark and Lois go out jogging together.
Clark's built in this period, and as well, isn't he? Clark.
Yeah.
There's no sort of. Everyone goes on about he can be Clark because he sort of stoops over. That dude's looks like a brick shit house. He looks like a fucking WCW wrestler, doesn't he?
Yeah, and but it's that the concept of him jogging alongside.
I think she says, like, "Can you try and sweat a bit or something?" Because
and so he tells her the story of basically having gone through the exact process previously, and or one of his first early journalist roles of having seen somebody get killed as a result of them, and him then facing into dealing with the upsetting the husband with regard to it.
Yeah.
And the fact that he, as I say, it's this thing about him saying, it's about positioning this character who has the ability to, faster than a speeding bullet and jump buildings at a single bound, but kind of lacks the people skills that are necessary to deal with
Yeah.
these really difficult mental challenges of interacting with people who are going through these sorts of struggles.
Yeah.
Um,
There's an element of restraint as well. We'd all like to maim that bloke, wouldn't we? I'm sure,
mm,
but he does in the first one, the flashback. He does use his physicality, doesn't he? I mean, he kind of
yeah,
does in both because he breaks through the window, doesn't he? But and it really goes badly for him in the flashback incident because he ends up killing the woman, doesn't he?
yeah.
And Superman, being Superman, can never shake that off. Yeah, it's really interesting dynamic in this man, and it's a lovely counterpoint to what comes after it, which is just fucking punching, isn't it? For about 4 issues.
Yeah, and when he, with Pac-Man and the tree, and I don't
Yeah.
think the tree could take much more.
Oh man, I love that scene. One of my favourite scenes in all of film is in Superman the movie when he says to him, "One thing I do know, son, is you've been put here for a reason." I love that scene. It actually chokes me up every time I see it, and it's a similar one, that isn't it, with a different sort of looking park
Yeah,
and everything. But he goes back as he is wont to, throughout all of comics. Certainly in our age, Superman goes back to Smallville and he stands in the garden at 4 a.m. and his dad, who is the wisest man in the world, pretty much for him, isn't he? He comes out and Superman's about to punch a tree and he says, "Look, hold on, I quite like that tree. Don't punch it." And it's that lovely moment. It's that lovely dynamic between the two of them, where you've got this man who can literally pull cities out of the ground and carry them across, across deserts. But he's put in his place by this little guy in his dungarees. Yeah, it's great.
and
Yeah,
so much of that as well ties into this period of when Superman was being written,
yeah,
because it wasn't long after. Oh, see, this is where I forget the ordering of some of this.
yeah,
When did Pac-Man? No, it's
yeah.
Pac-Man has the heart attack after
As
Superman dies.
post Superman
Yeah,
dies. Yeah, because
yeah,
yeah,
and it's but it is that whole he is an old man who has frailties. Um, so yeah, no, it's to me, as I say, it's one of these stories as well that just stuck with me. This concept of saying, everyone goes, "Oh, it's impossible to write a good Superman story because how do you write a story for somebody who has all the power and can't, so for how do you
yeah,
what do you do to get round the fact that he can stop anything or do anything he wants to do?" It's a case of this does it.
yeah,
This is
yeah.
I mean, it's obviously it's a horrendous subject matter, but at the same time, this shows that it is
It should be
entirely
addressed,
possible.
And we've always got these little moments in Spider-Man and Superman,
Oh,
especially where they're just confronted with real life, aren't they? For that.
well, it's the whole Spider-Man great power, great responsibility piece.
Yeah,
This is this whole,
yeah,
doesn't matter how powerful you are, sometimes you are not the answer.
yeah,
Sometimes a big fist is not the answer. Sometimes getting the person with the journalistic skills and being able to do the soft approach is the answer.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I think that was a little bit overworked a few years ago, where they were going on about Lois Lane being the greatest character in the DC universe, but she definitely is right for this, isn't she?
yes,
Yeah,
and it helps demonstrate the Lois Clark relationship as well.
yeah. Especially when they're out jogging. Now, this was also written by two different people, isn't it? It's seemingly
Hmm.
Louise Simonson starts it off, and Dan Jurgens finishes it, which I think shows a steady hand on the tiller for Mike Carlin, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I think this really shows the power of the Triangle
Yes.
era,
Yeah.
which would have run from very late 80s through to, well, it kind of well no, the return of the Superman was still triangled, I
Yeah.
think, but
Yeah.
obviously each of the titles took its own character to build out. For those that don't know what we're talking about when we say the Triangle era,
Yeah.
um, at that point in time there were four Superman titles.
Mm-hmm.
As part of the 50th anniversary of DC, they had tried to say they wanted Superman, or they wanted to try to have a weekly comic, and Action Comics Weekly was born and
It was a sort of an anthology for a while, wasn't it? It's actually quite an interesting experiment. I know Jurgens wrote for that. I think he did. I think he was involved with Mike Barron on Dead Man in that.
Yeah, so there's a great Dead Man story. There's a great, I want to say, Etrigan and the Demon story in that
Okay.
as well. And Wild Dog came out of that,
of course,
if I remember correctly. So, there's some great bits and pieces in there, but it didn't quite hold together the way they wanted it to. So the next approach was to turn around and say, well, if we want a weekly Superman book, we'll create a fourth Superman title, which happened to be Man of Steel.
Yeah.
And then that meant they had Action Comics, Superman, Adventures of Superman, and Superman the Man of Steel.
Yeah.
And basically you said, well, on any 4-week month, you've got one of those will come out every week.
Yeah.
And that is
and they had newsagent. They had newsagent distribution as well over here, so it wasn't just a comic shop thing. It wasn't going in every week to a comic shop. I remember buying a lot of these issues in a newsagent in Forest Hill. So which is great. Which is a shame that they don't do it again now. But yeah, definitely.
So with those weekly titles, what they did was they put a small triangle on the front and numbered the triangle, so you could tell in a given year. I think they just ran 1 to 52 and then started 1 to 52 again, or whatever the right number was. And that way you could kind of keep on top of, well, what book's next? If you had a pile of them to read.
Yeah.
But you're right, that only works if you have a very strong editor knowing how everything ties together. And they did within that take certain sort of sub stories and keep them only within the titles that they were in. So within this story, there's an entirely throwaway.
Yeah, there's like a 2-page thing, isn't there? Yeah, which I know from memory continues much later. Yeah.
Which you kind of go, well, that's fine. That's a storyline that's been planted for that point. But but this, again, this is back to this early 90s where you had the Superman powerhouse, and all the people that you had, the DC powerhouses as well, the Batman powerhouse as well, holding everything together. So, and so you had Mike Carlin holding together the whole of the Superman threads and going, right, fine, this is how it all interweaves, how it all interconnects. And, Louise
that's a late night at the office job, isn't it, that one? Yeah.
But that's, you used to hear, again, this is pre-internet and all sorts of stuff, you would get the Comics International article on the fact that the Superman retreat had taken place.
Yeah.
Or the Batman retreat had taken place, and Denny O'Neil, was there with Alan Grant and all the different writers and artists that were about at that point. And okay, the Batman stuff didn't quite weave together. Oh, I suppose it did.
Nightfall kind of did, didn't it? Yeah.
Nightfall and then No Man's Land and all that sort of stuff. Where again, it was like, look, there's multiple titles and they are all interconnected, without going down the route of then having 20,000 spin-off titles as well. So there was another thing you've discussed elsewhere.
Yeah, to me, the Superman titles were, the art was more in line with each other. I think a lot of the Batman stuff, if you read a collection of No Man's Land, it flips between art styles, never mind artists. You know what I mean? There's quite a jarring difference between some of the stories. But this one, it's a lighter feel. I know he dies, but there's a lighter feel to the art. It's an easier run across, I think, the triangles,
Yeah. So that's, but the point is that you're saying that, you've got the two writers in here.
Yeah.
I imagine that somewhere there's been, as I say, part of that annual retreat that they would have had, there would have been outright plotting exercise, because it's almost the ultimate game of Mad Libs. It's like going, right, I've written it to this bit, you need to write the next bit, and you've got to finish the story off. And from a plotting perspective, this is actually not that difficult, because the plot is literally issue 1, find out about the next door neighbors, get upset about it. Issue 2, resolve the problem. Yeah. There's not that the actual beauty in the writing then comes to turn and say, how do you make sure it paces correctly inside each of those two issues?
I think these are both. Yeah, I think these are both incredibly well written. I genuinely found it quite impactful read, I think. I didn't expect it to be sometimes. God bless them, the Adventures of Superman and stuff. They were, at Star Labs or wherever it's going to be. They were just fun, weren't they? This much
But I
more.
think, because looking on comics.org, these 2 issues have never been reprinted in anything.
Really? Wow. I didn't
It's not
realise
part
that.
of any collected set.
Okay.
And that's partially because, as you say, it's sort of filler.
Yeah.
Um,
And they're just
and
$3.99 on eBay. They're not expensive to buy either. Bear in mind they haven't been
oh,
collected. Sometimes the titles, shoot up a bit, don't they? When you
but
can't get them otherwise.
well, the thing is, it's the last storyline before something important happens.
Yeah.
So people kind of go, well, I'll just get the bits from, from the first appearance of Doomsday's fist.
Yeah. That's interesting because the first appearance of Doomsday's Fist also has Gary Johnson in it. So for
who's
those
the next door neighbor?
the next door neighbor is this guy called Gary, the one that we think there's a resolution at the end of the second issue, at the end of Superman 72. There appears to be some indication that Superman has sorted his mind out and he's grabbed hold of Gary and he says, we're going to fix you. I'll take you somewhere you can be fixed. And there's almost like a strange grinning effect going on that you messaged me about and said, I don't quite understand, seems a bit out of place.
Look, looking at that page again, the background, the overlay, is actually from the page really early in the story.
Yeah.
Of when he finds the dead body of the
Okay.
backstory. I seriously hadn't put that together until about half an hour.
Yeah,
ago.
that is an interesting effect, isn't it? Yeah, because you got
the
the close up on Clark's face thing, haven't you?
Yeah. So it is him going, "Oh, I'm happy I've resolved this," when in reality he's not thinking about the fact it hasn't resolved. Somebody with anger management issues always
doesn't
has
just
anger
go
management
away
issues,
like that. Yeah, we're not that naive.
Yeah.
But and then in the next issue, he makes a cameo, Gary. So Clark and Lois, long before the first punch is thrown against Doomsday, are walking through their Clark's apartment block, and they bump into Gary, and Gary is quite rude, oafish and offish with them, isn't he? And it's this strange moment. Because I just thought, I really enjoyed these 2 issues. I thought I'll have a little read through. I remember, after this, I remember reading all of these issues, and I thought I don't know if they're using it as a cheap shot to show Clark and Lois in a sort of domestic circumstance with something from the previous issue to counterpoint against Superman getting bashed up by Doomsday in a couple of issues' time. It's a strange one. I can't quite figure it out in my head. I don't know what they were thinking with that.
I think it's, well, again, don't want to overreach, but it's that combination of going, what did he think he told Superman? And now he's going, but I'm not going to tell Clark Kent.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say, what. Versus, he probably, whether he does or doesn't know that Lois knows. Actually, no, he must do because she goes through. But, there's still going to be resentment there because, the wife's moved on and stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's also this whole thing about setting up the destruction of Metropolis and the fact that loads of people go missing or die with the description. It's one of the things that it's like one of these things you don't talk about in comics, is the fact that, that building collapsed with, and the whole thing about Clark Kent goes missing for ages after the death of Superman. It's because, he was buried under a pile of rubble type thing. Well, Gary was probably buried under the same pile of rubble and unfortunately didn't make it. And it's, there's all these little bits. And some of it's as well about going, how often have you gone, well, he's your next door neighbor, he's always your next door neighbor.
Yeah.
So you can't just suddenly go, oh yeah, Gary's disappeared.
So, it would be comics where, next, a couple of issues is a different creative team and he's living somewhere else, and it's all a bit forgotten. In a way, it's good to see him back. There's a couple of things I want to talk about, and we are going to have a little chat about Jurgens in a minute as well. But to me, this is a story that is solved by for want of a better term, the humans, and I'm referring to Clark as part of that as well. So Superman doesn't solve this, even though we do get that last page where Superman's flying off with him. That in my head doesn't count. Clark and a lot of it, Lois, solve this problem as much as they
Yes.
can do, because it will never be completely solvable, as we all
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. I think that's good. I also had a little think about how could this be dealt with at other comic companies. So I'll run through it. I'll run through in a second that, but it goes back to pretty much there's very few characters that you could tell this story with other than Clark Kent and Superman. It wouldn't work as a Batman story, wouldn't work as a
No.
Wonder Woman story, wouldn't work as a Flash story. It's got to be Clark and it's got to be Superman. There's that duality there, isn't there, in the story?
Mm-hmm.
So here's what I was thinking. So if this was at Marvel, Punisher would shoot him in the head. Yeah.
Right.
If this was at Vertigo, Sandman would appear and he'd transport the kid and the mum into a dream realm where there would be all kinds of woodland creatures. If this was an Image, especially Extreme Studios, it would be the origin story for a female superhero. That would be the wife. If this was at Comico, this would have them transported into a fantasy realm and on LSD. If this was at Fantagraphics, they'd have to have a long conversation in a coffee shop or a record shop about it. And if this was Dredd, he'd probably arrest them both and stick them in the ISO cubes. So to me, it's almost like it's got to be DC for somehow. I don't know why. I mean, I suppose Cap could deal with it, but it would
Cap could deal with it. There's a Spider-Man thing that could be.
Yeah, it could be actually
of sorts. But again, it's the how did you find out type thing.
Yeah.
To me, because it is the way this story works, is it about that juxtaposition about saying having a or what. It's about giving the Flash a story where moving at normal pace is the answer.
Yeah.
It's about saying to Thor, here's a storyline where putting the hammer down is the answer. It's that complete, how do you flip it? How do and it's about.
I could see a Green Arrow story about it, but it would be very much into the. You would spend time in the refuge with the woman if it was a Green Arrow story, because he's got that sort of, especially around this time with Grell, there's that socially conscious area, isn't there, that's going on. Yeah, it's interesting. Apply it to the character, and the character resolves the story or doesn't resolve it is an interesting way to deal with this and this. And I think Superman's a great character to use it on, and at a great time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there are Batman Bruce Wayne stories, I suppose, where it has come to punishment. There's certainly Batman Nightwing stories where you would turn around and say, yes, you need the softer people skills of Dick Grayson than you do the harshness of the thing. The other thing that's interesting in this is that because there's a sub storyline about the kids bullying another kid, and it's about that whole touch of going, here's the circle of violence.
Yeah.
Of saying, if the father hits the mother, then the kid's learning that, well, I'll pick on somebody weaker as well. And there's that, there's so much in this.
Yeah, I think
it's crammed into two issues. As you say, if this was done in sort of like a Fantagraphics or some sort of indie comic like that, you could have a huge graphic novel about how to deal with this whole thing.
Yeah. About them, their relationship, which I think is important. I think as well, what they do is quite brave in a way, and I don't think we would see it quite so much over here, at the moment. I think because now a wife beater, it's an abhorrent thing, but a wife beater is a wife beater. I think what they do here is they don't give him a reason, but they give him a motivation to do it. He's losing his job. You got the first few pages is about him sort of slowly losing his mind, and he can't support his family, and he feels shame, and he takes it out on his wife. No excuse, obviously, but they do that. I don't think we'd see that much over. I don't think Marvel and DC would go into it that much. I think it would be a fait accompli. He beats his wife. I think that shows the chops of Louise Simonson, really.
Yeah. So I think now it would more be around. It's one of the weaknesses in the book, in that. It is a little bit of a cartoon bruise.
Okay, yeah.
Right? And what I mean by that is, I think if you were doing it now, it'd more be about how do you do mental abuse and
That's true,
you know
actually. Yeah. Coercive control, for example.
the
Yeah.
controlling
Yeah.
of access to your phone and dealing with your taking your money away from you and all that sort of stuff. This is clearly proper physical violence,
Yeah.
and they do the whole put the plaster over the nose. There's a when she speaks with her mother briefly, and her mother goes, "What happened?" She goes, "I fell over." I'm like going, it looks like you've been in a boxing match for
Yeah.
the last,
Yeah, no.
and that's just because of it's comic shorthand,
Yeah.
and
Agreed.
it's that whole, you've got to do, I've got two panels here to tell you that this woman's been hit in the face by her husband. Fine, I'm going to give her a big shiner, and it's as I say, look at like she's essentially got a broken nose, but for all intents and purposes, and it's that 5 rounds with Tyson look.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of me at times where I went, that's just a little heavy-handed
Yeah, I think you're right, man. I
because
think
if it,
they don't take enough time to flesh out the situation. They spend more
mm,
time on Clark and Lois in this, which is a choice.
which
He's the title character, but yeah.
it's two issues in Superman's books.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that this is the this is the MacGuffin.
Yeah.
It's like, oh look, there's it's that whole Batman 66 TV series. You give them a problem at episode 1, you solve it at episode 2.
Yeah.
This is all this is, and the problem happens to be, by the way, there's domestic abuse happening in the house next door.
Yeah.
Now
I
go
suppose
solve it.
I don't have the physical copies of this. I don't know if you can remember. Do they give a helpline out?
I do not remember, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, I don't.
And
And
it
that's
didn't go a lot for him.
one of my pet hates about people who deal with any kind of issues. Whether it be physical violence or mental issues or whatever it's going to be. Nobody these days seems to give out a helpline number. Yeah.
When you can, and we were talking about this before we start recording,
Yeah.
about weaknesses with the app,
Yeah.
or the various apps. There's nothing on the app either, and
That's
that
true.
would be the easiest thing in the world
Yeah.
to drop into the app. The absolute easiest thing in the world to say, oh,
Totally,
here's
on
an
the
extra
contents
page dropped in,
Yeah.
boom, at the back.
And they're writing the contents pages, for the app. There is,
Yeah.
they could easily put it up front and center on there, Yeah.
It's so that's, and in fact, I don't think it will have said anything because, again, on the comics.org website, it lists the fact that there is a promo ad, house advertisement. Yeah, it doesn't say
Right.
anything in there about. So unless it was a tiny throwaway line,
Yeah. It's a bit
I
naughty,
don't
isn't
think
it?
there will be. So
Yeah.
I think you're right. The app, and the other problem I've got with the app is that it's got the titles in sequential order, not in the
Yeah.
order of the triangles. So you literally have to come out of one title, and when it says, "Do you wish to read the next issue?" I'm like going, "I do, but I want to read the next issue of the triangles, not the next
Yeah.
issue of the."
I can only guess. I think I said this,
Um,
talked about this on ACP this week. I think I can only guess it's an intern who
oh,
just loads them on, man.
yeah.
Why isn't one of the most famous periods of Superman's history? I think probably of the period, this triangle thing is beloved, isn't it? People love this triangle thing.
It's a proper high watermark.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a shame. Yeah, okay, cool. So it's an interesting double hitter issue. I think it's I can't believe they've never reprinted it. It's incredible, isn't it? It's mad, isn't it? It's probably because people should read it. If you can find it, it's cheap to buy. If you haven't got the DC app, it's cheap to buy. Let's have a little chat about Jurgens, if you don't mind, if that's right. Have you got anything else on that, man?
No, that's cool.
Cool. Yeah, so Dan Jurgens, I think it's probably one of the creators on this we haven't covered in the podcast. You can go back a couple of episodes ago and listen to us talk about Wheezy. But Jurgens, born in 1959 in Minnesota, he loved. There's a YouTube video about how much he loved an Infantino cover. As one of his sort of formative creators. He's probably most famous for creating Doomsday and Cyborg Superman and Booster Gold, who's still massive, isn't he? His first work was on the US version of Warlord, issue 63, and it came from, he managed to get to meet Mike Grell and show him his portfolio. And Grell was so impressed that he got him a job at DC within a week, and he was working on that. Did you ever read Warlord, dude? Was that one of those books you read? Or
Very odds and sods.
Yeah.
Not beginning to end.
It's a funny
Yeah.
series that seemingly went on for ages and ages.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like so much the sword sorcery stuff though that
yeah,
kind of get mixed and matched into people saying, well, oh, I'm not really into Conan. Oh, this is just Conan with big feathery hair and
yeah. It looks like
hat.
yeah,
It's kind
looks
of
like
a
Green Arrow but with white hair. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
1984, he did the Sun Devils limited series, which is also his intro to being a writer. I think he's one of those guys. For me, is kind of as well known a writer and an artist. I don't know how you feel about that,
Well,
Al, being
I was
more of
going
a
to say
DC
he's
guy.
one of the people who is a proper writer artist.
Yeah,
As in John Byrne's probably the other big one for some of that. But in terms of the sort of the mainstays for the big two companies, when you're actually saying who are the proper writer artists who
yeah,
did big runs of their own stuff, writer combined, he's right up there with that.
yeah,
Now, and he's involved, as you say, in some of the big important storylines of the time,
yeah,
from the Superman Doomsday, and he's probably responsible for giving Superman a mullet. But that was the
yeah,
time. That was the time.
yeah.
Um, and that so from that perspective, he is again one of the sort of unsung heroes of DC,
He
and
really
DC's
is,
great for
man.
doing that.
He's dependable. I think he knows what he's doing. He writes a good story. He has got a very readable art style as well.
Yeah,
Like a lot of the guys
yeah.
back then, who were doing this sort of thing. So 1985, he created Booster Gold. A lot of work at DC around this time. His first Superman as a penciler was the Adventures of Superman Annual #1 in 1987. Seems later than that. I kind of usually think of him as being a bit older than that, but he's not actually that
Yeah.
old. Like we talked about, he worked on the Action Comics anthology series with Mike Barron on Dead Man. He did Green Arrow with Mike Grell, which is a great run, superb run. 1989, he took over writing and penciling on the Adventures of Superman. In 1991, he's the penciler on the Armageddon 2001 event.
We should go back. We should talk about that one of these
Oh
days.
man, yeah, I remember reading that on a train and thinking, what is this? Yeah. Other titles include JLA. He did a Metal Men mini-series, 0 Hour. He did the Superman Doomsday prestige format book, which rather confused me as a reader back then, thinking, I thought this had all gone away now.
Yeah.
Did Superman Aliens. He did, whilst he's probably best known at DC, he did do some work at Marvel. He worked on the new Spider-Man series. It was back when Ben Reilly was in the chair for Spider-Man, and he didn't really like it that much, from what I understand, what I've heard him talk about. During that time, he worked at Valiant as well. He worked on Solar, Man of the Atom. I think he did about 10 issues of that. He'd worked on Thor in '99, which is a great little callback to the Kirby period on Thor, because there's JRJR in it as well, and it looks absolutely lovely. And he worked on some Kappa around that time as well. In 1999, he actually wrote the biggest selling issue of that year in 1999. Can you guess what that is, Al? I'll give you a clue. It's not Marvel or DC. I wouldn't have known this, man,
99.
completely. Yeah, it's a really weird period for comics, isn't it? 99.
I was going to say, all right, so that's.
It's a video game.
Oh gosh. No, I was going to say because it'll be comical or something like that from a publication or something, or
Top Cow.
we want Top Cow. All right. He didn't do a Spawn video game runoff or something.
No, almost Tomb Raider. Believe it or not.
All right.
Yeah, I didn't know
but
that
that's
was.
the thing that
Yeah,
that was one of these things where, like with the Alien, or I'm surprised that wasn't. All right, I would have if you'd asked me where was the Tomb Raider book published, I would have said Dark Horse.
right.
Just because
Okay.
Dark Horse had
Yeah.
all of those things.
I hate to
in the
admit it.
90s.
Don't want to let anyone down, but I've never bought a Tomb Raider comic. I can quite
Nor
please
have
say.
I. Nor
Yeah.
have I.
Although when we used to get really drunk, me and my friend used to drown her because he said she made a sex noise. That sounds very dark now. He dipped in and out of various different titles and various different companies. I think most recently I've read him would be in the Dynamite Tarzan book, which is really good. I mean,
Right? Mhm.
yeah, I've got a soft spot for Dynamite. I know there's the Vampirella and Red Sonja stuff is a little bit exploitation, but the Tarzan books are absolutely brilliant. It's really good. Yeah, that's where he sits with that. Is he a creator you will buy if you see him on a cover, dude? Well, I'm guessing he is.
Yes. It's probably more he's a creator that if I see him on the cover, then I'll be delighted to know that it's going to be a solid story.
Yeah, I agree.
And maybe
Totally.
that's one of these
Yeah.
things. He's not the let's go hunt him out type
Yeah.
creator. He's not the and because other than things like the Superman Aliens thing, it's not like you've turned around and gone, oh, here's the big hardcover that he's done, or here's the groundbreaking
Yeah. Here's the art book or anything
um
like that. No.
miniseries or something like that, where you go, yep, that's the one that's been collected to death and will be forever in print and all this sort of stuff. Arguably, his magnus opus is the Death of Superman.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's he's
It's a sort of
solid.
creative, like there's a
Absolutely
few
solid.
guys like this, aren't there? You can pick up and it's just going to be very readable. Like his Teen Titans stuff, it's just like really
Yeah,
readable, man. It's just
he
a
just
good
knows how
thing.
to, and I think he's really good at doing that. As you say, the balance between the hero and the human.
Yeah.
And that's again that works for things like the Titans, where you go, it's not just about when they're out battling
Yeah, there's a soap opera
brother
element
blood.
to it that he
There's
does
the
well,
whole,
doesn't it? Yeah.
what were
Yeah.
they like back in the tower? And it's the same with, arguably that's the whole thing about Booster Gold. It's actually the story of him being a guy who wanted to make
A
money,
flawed human, yeah.
and it
Yeah.
actually all went horribly wrong, and he ended up,
People love
um,
Booster Gold as well. He's one of those characters. People fucking love him, and he's had some great runs, I think.
yeah,
Again, just solid, readable runs of comics,
yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I think from that side of things, definitely, he's somebody that certainly in that period was producing some of the best DC books out there in terms of holding DC together as a universe.
Yeah, and he can't be blamed for the whole
not just that.
speculator thing around the Death of Superman, can he? They're
No,
definitely,
that's
yeah.
Well, the thing is as well, actually rereading the Death of Superman stuff, it's actually really well done.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah,
Right?
I like the audio
So
play of it. I like it all, man. Yeah, yeah.
there is there's this whole thing about, oh yeah, it was done for speculate, it was done to make sales and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, but you could do that and still have it rubbish.
Yeah.
They actually did it, and even down to the subtle things that a lot of people didn't notice till a lot later about the, every issue that you got fewer and fewer panels per
Yeah.
page and things
Yeah.
like that, where you're going there. And again, how much of that was Mike Carlin?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
the thing there. I would be delighted if Dan Jordans was producing
A Superman title.
comics today and it was doing a Superman title. It would be really good.
Yeah. Well, that leads me to the final question: is are you reading Superman at the moment?
I am not reading Superman at the moment,
Right. Okay. Yeah.
partially because it's one of these that it became so confusing as to
Yeah.
who is Superman, who is Superboy,
Everything's a
who
fucking
is
team book now. You know what I mean? Yeah.
and I'm yeah, I don't mind, and there is this whole thing about should Lois and Clark have got married? Was that jumping the shark? Well,
Yeah.
and all this sort of stuff. Fine, but you then, them having kids and that kid now being one of the
Superman
Supermen
as well. Yeah.
it just makes it very confusing for me in terms of just trying to stay on top of that.
Yeah. I was reading Robin the other day, and at one point in the Robin book, about 10 people from the Bat family turn up to help him out, and I'm like, it's just turning into a load of team books now. I want a Superman title where he's worried about where he's going to put his clothes when he changes, how he's going to get back to the globe to change back into Clark, and it should be about him. If it's a Superman title, it should be about him. It's not about 45 other characters who have an S on their chest somehow.
So, right, if you want a good Superman book at the moment,
Yeah.
and or a good Batman book for that matter,
Oh, World's Finest. Yeah.
World's Finest being written by Mark Waid is, because it's completely out of continuity.
Yeah.
And it's just, this is a good Batman Superman storyline.
Yeah, I've been reading that. I read that on the app. I really like it. Yeah.
With the even with the use of Robin there. To there's I forget the reference at tab, but years ago there is a reference for Batman Superman where Robin's really excited, and then Batman has to stop saying, "You have to remember he's not human."
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
kind of play on that in the world's finest book this time around as well, about going, "Don't trust him; he's not human."
Okay.
And
Yeah.
that's a really, I was like, I love the way that's tied together. So no, I think that's the best adaptation of Superman at the moment.
Yeah, I agree with you, man.
Of the
Actually,
pieces I'm reading.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm reading that. And there's a little spin off they've done as well. Is there a Teen Titans book they've done? They're
Yeah,
doing?
I don't
Yeah.
know if I've not. I think I've got the first issue of that. I've not read
Yeah,
it.
it looks good. And Dan Mora on the art in it is superb.
Mm,
Dan
yeah.
can Dan
So
can really draw, can't he? I think he's one of the MVPs at DC at the moment. I think definitely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's where I would probably be more inclined to go. It's back to this whole thing about saying what are you trying to achieve with both the Superman and the Batman books? Because
Yeah.
I think you can either go down the route of saying, right, Action Comics is telling this story, Superman's telling that story, and Adventure Superman's telling a different story. In the same way that you can say Detective tells one type of stories and Batman tells another type of stories
Yeah.
in terms of the books. Have crossovers if you want, or keep some sort of common thematic continuity, but it doesn't need to be in and out. Or you go the full blown other way, which is the triangles,
Yeah.
and that requires a hell of a lot of strength. I just don't think we have strong enough editors anymore.
I think you're right, man. And I also think, especially maybe more so, or definitely more so in the Bat universe, there's too many Bat titles. You wouldn't keep up. It would be in the Harley Quinn book. It would be in all these different books that people who read Batman don't necessarily want to read. With the Superman Triangle stuff, you wanted to read those 4 issues, didn't you? Because they were all kind of about him.
Well, it was a weekly book. This
Yeah.
was the thing. It just happened to have 4 creative teams.
Yeah.
And that again only really works if you've got strong editorialship.
Yeah, definitely. Good. Thanks, mate. It was a good shout. It's nice little one to do.
Stuff.
Not as if we haven't podcasted much together recently, so there you go. Good stuff. And how are you getting on with your stuff? What are you up to at the moment?
Oh, ticking along.
You're doing small press day this weekend?
Doing small press day, so that's August the 5th, depending on when people are listening to this.
Yeah, so I'll be putting this out. This will be out on Wednesday, so it'll be the Saturday. If you get this the first day, it'll be on Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah, so Saturday, August the 5th, I'll be at small press day in Edinburgh, right in the city centre at City Chambers.
Okay.
I think we're open from 1 till 5, organised by Edinburgh's Forbidden Planet.
Oh, cool. Nice one.
A few other known names will be there.
Yeah, I was looking at the list today, so yeah, it looks like quite a cool event. Yeah.
So
good man.
Yeah, that's that'll be good for that.
And are you in DUI 3?
Stuff I'm yes.
Okay, that's been put
Mike
to bed at the moment.
Yeah.
Oh, cool, Mike. Yeah, I know Mike. He's on the Slack, isn't he? Yeah. So I think I'm in a little group with Eamon and a couple of Vince and Dan are doing some of the lettering and design work, and I think it's getting very close now. I think it's almost there. Just a few sort of dots and dashes need adding, and it'll be done. I think so. It's hopefully end of the summer. I guess it'll be out and released. So look out for that as well.
In time for the big con season at the end for those that are going to that con.
There's so many cons.
You're not, because you're off to this.
Fucking hell, that weekend, right? So there's SPX and Baltimore the same weekend. I'm having to do both because I'm working at SPX. It's the same weekend as Nice. It's the same weekend as Bridlington, and I think there's one other from memory, and I can't remember which it is. But there's like all these cons are the same weekend. It's a real shame. I'm going to say it's a shame that we haven't heard from Nottingham, have we? I don't know if they. I doubt they're probably going to do one now.
It's not this year. No.
It's normally October, isn't it? So
yeah.
But yeah, no, con season's starting, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll pop down as a punter probably to the lakes.
Yeah, I'm seriously thinking about it. Yeah, I am thinking about it. John's a buddy, John Freeman, so I think I might see. I think Falpy was talking about wanting to go, but Falpy's doing permanent damage in a couple of weeks. Yeah, I think he's travelling the States doing conventions, and I'm meeting up with him, Keith Cumber, Matt Strott, Sam Arthurs, and a couple of others at the at SPX. So that should be a giggle. See what happens there. Yeah, good stuff, mate. And where can we find you online?
If you go to various old forms of social media, you'll still find me as Peng. Oh, to be fair, I'm on Threads as well, but nobody is.
Yeah, you.
Yeah, just search for Penguin.
Nice one. Excellent, mate. You can find all of these episodes over at neverrunanything.com and little updates in regards to everything else I'm doing in comics. Thanks for listening. The next one after this will be one that we've actually already recorded with Mr. Cannon. We'll be talking about his Kickstarter, and we get into the nuts of what it means to create on a comics page, and it's pretty interesting. And we've got some plans for another artist spotlight and a new voice to the podcast coming up soon. So look forward to that. Thanks, Al. Appreciate that, mate.